is me, your money. Let's talk, shall we? Ooh, look, your package came today. I can't wait to find out what we ordered. I'm sure you can't either. Look what I found. Remember this? A penny saved is a penny earned. Hello? Anybody in there? Echoey. Just look at them all. We're rich. I don't like the word hoarder. I prefer the term saving visionary. Who needs a 401k when this buried treasure could be worth something one day? And this. Yes, this. Worth every penny.
Wow, what a day already, huh? That's it's exciting. I'm excited to talk to you today. We have our second in this series, How to Inflation-Proof Your Life. I know that for a lot of us, it is one of those things that is so difficult right now. I mean, let's face it, just to have some eggs for breakfast is a contemplation of 3 easy payments. And so a lot of us are wondering how we can actually make it through given the circumstances what they are. So I want to ask you a question today. I want to know, from your perspective, how can I inflation-proof my life? I mean, how can I do that? What do I do to have things in place to be sure that I am not, running out of money? Before the end of my paycheck is there. You know what I'm getting at? It's hard. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out how to do it. And when prices are rising and circumstances are going, difficult, maybe difficult circumstances for you, things that you weren't planning on, things that you didn't know whether you could make it through it or not. And so it's been hard for you to know what to do. Let me just tell you this. When it comes to anything like inflation, these things are circumstances that we find ourselves in. They're in the world. They're the difficulties. And let's just face it, money can kind of ruin things for you. They really can. I need to ask right before we get started here today, I need to borrow $1. Does anybody have a dollar bill on you that I could borrow? You won't loan your pastor $1? I mean, what's the problem here, okay? Does anybody, in the back there, thank you so much. Is that Renee? It is Renee. Good. Thank you, Renee. Renee, thank you so much for trusting me with $1, okay? The rest of these people wouldn't do it, but you would. Thank you. This $1, we're going to think about this today because this right here, I want to describe it, make sure everybody understands what it is. It's a tool. It's something man-made. It wasn't made by God. This is not something that God has a special mint and they just drop from heaven. Good. I didn't have to get down off the platform. All right, you get the point, right? This is something that we use to live our lives. It's a means of exchange. It's a way that we deal with our needs. Now, Renee, don't worry. I promise I'll put this in the offering for you. All right, so... So anyway, the whole idea, though, is that as we think of money and we think of what money buys us, we think of the things we own or we have, our vehicles, our cars, the clothes we have on, which we're all thankful that we all wear them. And it's such an important part of our lives. It provides for things that we need to do. It takes care of when we are not well and we have to pay for services to take care of our health. It maybe buys insurance so we don't have to pay the entire bill for our health. So it's an amazing thing. And it's like, where does it come from? How can we know that it is a good tool for our lives? Well, with inflation rising like it is and living in the circumstances we live in, this has nothing to do with politics whatsoever. Matter of fact, the inflation rates have been up and down my entire lifetime, and so we've all seen that from time to time. Those of you who are younger in the room, you maybe don't feel it as much, but you You maybe see it and it may be a little scary to you. You may be afraid of what the future looks like. Will I be able to do the things that I hope to do with my life? Now I'm looking back on my life and I'm looking at all that I've done and all the money that's exchanged hands that I've had in my lifetime, and I think, boy, if I could just have a third of that back just stockpiled, wouldn't that be amazing? You know? A lot of us start to think about that, and now at my age, when I start to look back and I start now to look forward, and I think, oh boy, you know? And if it was hard enough just to get $1 out of you all, I don't know how I'll make it, you know? You get my point, though. We all have this concern. And the key comes down to God's plan, and God uses one of the greatest ways to illustrate this with a term that we maybe know of or understand. Last week we introduced a team that is in charge of this here at the church, but it's called stewardship. Stewardship is when we manage what we have. It's being a good manager of what we have. And that's an important part of this, because I believe that if we're truly doing stewardship as God would have us do it, then we can withstand any circumstance or situation just like inflation, or a difficult circumstance, or a debt, or something that has occurred in your life, something unexpected. Okay? So I want you to think of this. How you manage what you have will determine the outcome of your life. How you manage what you have. And understand, I'm not just talking about money now. I'm talking about everything. Some of us in this room are parents. How many parents are out there? I mean, a little whoop, whoop, okay? Or should I say oh, you know? Because it may feel like that, right, at times. But you're stewards. You're stewards of the children that you have been blessed with in your home. How many of you are grandparents? Anybody grandparents here? Yeah. All right, that's me. All right. Well, I'm a parent too still, but I can tell you that the opportunity to pour into those kids, I mean, I'm a steward. I'm a steward of what I have, and it will affect the outcome of not only my life, but their lives as well. So my time, my resources, but also, very practically, my money has a lot to do with how the outcome of my life will be. Jesus had a lot to say about this. Matter of fact, in one of the most famous sermons he ever gave was the Sermon on the Mount. And he talked about so many things there, but it basically turned the world upside down when he did this. All of those who were his followers were like, what? Because they were expecting him to, kind of roll out the law and what they were supposed to do with the law, and how the Jews would be superior over everyone. There were people wanting that, because they thought if he truly was the Messiah, then that's what he would be there to do. Except he didn't. He actually showed what everyone needed. His leadership and what he taught then was so powerful and so impactful in the lives of not only his disciples, but everyone that listened. So the people, thousands we think, were there listening, trying to hear every word he said. He said these words, and Matthew caught them. He wrote them down so that we would know. Matthew was there. He was an eyewitness. He heard every word that was stated, and this is what Matthew had to say in verse 19. Jesus said this to the crowd: "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal." The whole idea of storing up, is hoarding, basically, or taking in things we don't need. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, just go and open the door to your garage. Okay? You know what I'm talking about. It's the place where we have all of these things that we don't ever use, but we try to figure out how we might better use them. And we were trying to figure it out, but we store them and we store them and we store them. Okay? But the idea of it is that these treasures that we have here on earth, they're temporary. Okay? They're temporary. You ever bought something new and then within just a little bit of time of buying it, it's like you did something to it. You broke it, you wrecked it, you scratched it, you ruined it somehow. You ever done that? You ever had that happen? Sure. Moths and vermin destroy things around us. It's always, why? Because it's temporary. Or thieves will take it. Somebody will take it. We don't pay attention. We'll lose things because someone steals them. But then the verses go on, and it goes to verse 20. "But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. And there's a reason for this. This storing up for the future, for what we're doing, means that the investment we make with everything we have needs to have an eternal label on it. In other words, something that's going to last beyond right now. So that means every time I spend, every time I spend Renee's dollar, okay, every time I use a dollar, every time, no matter how many of them are stacked on top of each other, and now all I do is basically, I use my phone a lot with, you can just tap the thing there at the register. Is that scary to any of you? It is to me sometimes. I wonder, what are they learning about me when I do that? But I look cool, so I like to do it, But the whole idea comes down to, it's like, am I using this the way Jesus taught me to? Jesus taught me that I should store up for myself. So the investments that I take of these things that I have, and this being very practical, this thing, money, how I use this actually sets me up for something that's going to last. And then he basically tells us why this is true. In the last part of this, he says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart is also." Am I thinking about the temporary and just wanting for me right now? Is that what I want to do with it? Do I spend it so fast that I don't even know where the money went? Where did that go? What happened? It's like, where did the money come from? It's gone. What do I do? Or is it more of a thought here? It kind of reveals our heart. It reveals what we have decided inside of us, what we will do, and how we will live our lives. Every time it will come from this experience that we definitely, we go through life having to spend this, but do we ever ask the question, where's my heart? So how we use our money is a measure of our heart for God. Every time I take one of these out, or I take plastic out, or my phone, or whatever I do to spend money, every time I do it, it's a measure of my heart for God. And can I just say this? One of the things we learn is that he's not worried about this. God doesn't need our money. He doesn't need your money, doesn't need my money, doesn't need Renee's money. Doesn't need the money here. God doesn't need it. You know why? Because before Renee had this dollar, it was in somebody else's hands. And before it was printed, all right? Before it was ever printed at the Mint, the U.S. Mint, and a serial number's put on there, all of that, and how ironic, on the back, "In God we trust." Right here, before any of that was done, God owns it all. Any source of anything that exists, any part of this, it all came from him. It all is a part of what he owns. And if God truly is the Lord Almighty, like we learned last week, if that's really true, that he's the one power source of all things, he owns it all, and he's the source of it all, he's the creator of it all, and the fact that we have any of it make us managers or stewards of it all. What we're given, the portion we're given, we all are in that situation. But it really comes down to it. God's not wanting this. He doesn't need it. What he wants is your heart. What he wants is your heart. He wants my heart, your heart. He wants to know that we are totally saying, God, there's no one else. We acknowledge you for who you are. And so, God, we want you to be the one in charge of our lives. We want you to be the one that we follow. We know that your standard for managing everything and the outcome of my life, it's all in your hands, God. That's what he's wanting. He's wanting us to fully worship and say, God, we acknowledge you as the one true and only God. That's what he's wanting from you. He's not being selfish in any way. It's not any of that. He just knows that as he's created us and as he has this, what's going to be best for us is to follow him and to worship him. That's what he wants for us. So I want to show you this because early on, when we go back to Scripture and we start to look at it, we look at the ancient scriptures of the Jewish people and how this was put together. And Moses wrote this account of God's interaction and what he's saying. He wants us to know this, and so he gave this to the people of Israel years ago in the book of Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy chapter 8, he says this, "You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me." We might say, I'm kind of a self-made person. I have done this, what I have is because of all my hard work, And I know a lot of you, I know you work hard. I know you do. The hours you put in, the time that you put in, it actually is something that God has sanctioned, actually working to have what you have. And the idea of it comes, if you look at this, if we can go back one more time to the other verse. There we go. And just look at this. The whole idea is we may say that it's by my power or by my strength of my hands that all of this is produced. But then God says this. Now we go to the verse. "But remember the Lord your God." Stop there. That's a statement that we should do every day anyway. All right? Imagine if before we ever spent $1, we remembered God before we did it. Do you think we would spend the money the same way? That's just a question. Think about that. Would you spend the money the same way if you knew and you thought of God before you did it? And then it was like this, "For it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth." He's the one who's given you the breath and the life, your heartbeat, your body, everything about you. God has given you that. He's actually put the people in your life that are there. He's the one who's has orchestrated this path for you to be in the job you're in right now, even if it sucks. Some of you just were like, "Oh, he just said sucks." Sorry. Okay. Please don't walk out on that one, okay? But the whole point is a lot of us feel that way about our jobs sometimes, right? Let's just be honest, don't we? But if we remembered that, wow, that's providing for my family, or it's providing me to buy the things I need or the things I need to do with, if we were to consider it, he's the one who's given us the ability to produce the wealth that we have. And so confirms his covenant. It's a promise that God has made, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. And what he's referring to is the fact is if you work, God will always take care of you. If you're willing to work, if you're willing to put in the time and to do this, God's given you that ability. He's always going to take care of you. And for some of us, you might say, "But you don't know my situation. It's bad." I want to say this, and I hope you will understand, but I believe that God's promises are always fulfilled. God never goes back on a promise. And this is one of those ones that was written so long ago and for a specific group of people, but yet it still applies to us and how we actually deal with what we do. It's a long-lasting one. It talks about God's character. This is critical for us to understand that God is going to give us what we need. Many times it's our decisions that puts us in places where it's like, I don't have enough money. It comes down to it. And if there is a reason why circumstances have been there and you've done everything and followed God, then God has a purpose and a reason to take you through that, and he's always going to care for you. He never does that. Last week we saw a verse that is so many times taken out of context, but the idea that God will never leave us or forsake us. That's in the context of what he gives us to live with and to live on. And so sometimes we think we're in trouble, but if we were to step back and actually do a plan that was stewardship-oriented, we actually managed what we had better, we would find we have a lot more than what we think. I can tell you, I can give testimony many times of mismanagement and bad stewardship on my part. And every time I find myself short of money, short of what I need. I wasn't planning. I didn't think about what might come up. I didn't have a plan together like I should have. I'm so thankful that there are people in my life who have pointed me in the right direction. I'm so glad that I have resources that I started to use because of them. And now, I don't worry nearly as much. But unfortunately, we're all going to have that concern. And so how do we deal with it? Just believe this to be true. This was from way back. But if we were to roll the clock ahead from from the ancient Jewish scriptures, and we were to go all the way through the Old Testament, and we were to get to the end of the Old Testament, and we would hear Malachi say, now hang on, because there's a Messiah coming. You have to make sure that you're doing things to remember where all of this comes from. Make sure that you've got this balanced in your life. That's what he said. Malachi is the last Old Testament prophet. And he stated those things. And then there was about 400 years worth of silence. And then Jesus comes on the scene. And Jesus, being the Son of God, God in the flesh, coming here with one purpose in mind, and that's to show his grace to us by taking the cross and taking the punishment we deserved for our sin. He became sin in our place and was punished for what we deserved, and then by raising from the dead gives us an opportunity that we get a gift of grace that we could never, ever repay, but he wants to give us. Now that's an amazing thought. So, from the time Jesus did that and then he ascended to heaven, he sent his followers off to then begin to talk and to tell people about this great message that he had to offer. And this is what happens. There are churches that are formed. And one of them was in the city of Corinth. So we go to the story of a local church. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, he was a church planter. That's what he did. He went out and equipped them and got them ready, and he taught. He wrote most of the letters that we read in the New Testament. He wrote them so these churches would know how to live their lives. And this is what he did. The first letter he wrote them was to get them on track. They had problems and difficulties. But by the time he got to the end of the letter, he tells them this in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. And he says, now, about the collection for the Lord's people. See, back then what they were doing, the way they would take offerings was not necessarily the same as what we would do here. Wouldn't be the same. And so what happens? The idea is that they take a collection for other churches and the needs of people around them. That's how they did their offerings back then. They weren't set up exactly the same way, but they did it based on ministry that needed to be done. They would give offerings. And so other churches were doing it. Matter of fact, the Galatian church, the Ephesian church, all these churches were doing it, and they were giving money and making sure the needs of other places were taken care of, especially in the church in Jerusalem, because they were getting hammered, in a sense, by inflation, if you will. And so he's telling them at Corinth, look, you've got a lot of things to get ready and to fix and to change in your church. A lot of people are stuck in their old way of living, and they've come to know Christ, and they don't realize they need to lay down these wrong things that they're doing. And so what happens? He says at the end of this, when it comes to the collection, let's go back, please, if you don't mind. Now about the collection for the Lord's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. He tells them, this is what I told the Galatian churches to do. This is how you get your act together. This is one of the things that you've got to start doing. You've got to start stewarding your money. He goes on now. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income. In other words, you have a plan to support what's going on in the local church. You save up money and you make sure you're prepared. You have all of your things ready. You're a better steward. You've got a budget together so you know what you're spending, so that at the beginning of every week you can set aside an amount so that when the collection time comes, you'll have it to give. And so they had never thought of that. This sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. No collections will have to be made. So in other words, they are already planning. So the plan was, come, save it at the beginning of the week, bring it, give it, and it's already taken care of. Then you'll have enough to actually live on for the rest of the week. You'll have something saved up for the next time. So he gave them a real plan for how to steward their money. Now, a couple years later, a year later or so, he writes another letter to this church. It's called, guess what? 2 Corinthians. And this is what he says to them in chapter 8. He says, and now, brothers and sisters, there's been a change, all right? Just let you know. This is a real success story. All right? This church got their act together. They took care of all the issues and the problems, all the things that they were needing. They got it all together, and this is what happened. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. You got to hear this. This is what happened in Macedonia. All these churches around you and that are close, this is what God has done in their lives. He says, in the midst of a very severe trial, okay? We don't know exactly what the trial was, but we have a good idea that the Romans were starting to really turn the screws on them and causing them to have to pay higher taxes. And it was causing them issues, especially Christians. They were coming in, and those that were following Christ, they were actually charging them more. And so it was a very severe trial. And actually, in that region, which is no surprise, even to today, that region has trouble with money. And it's an amazing thing. He says, in this severe trial, when there's all kinds of hunger around you, all kinds of things, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty in the midst of their extreme poverty, welled up in rich generosity. Hear this. They had such joy, even though they were going through a time of not having much. They didn't have many of these. And in that time of extreme poverty, it welled up in them to give and to be a part of that. Generosity was part of it. Why? Because they listened to his words before and put a plan together so that they had saved up, had enough to live on, be able to make it through the difficult and severe trial that they were going through. Now the verses go on. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able. They gave as much as they were able. Meaning that God's not wanting everything. He's not wanting you to sacrifice eating or living or doing the things necessary. He didn't want them to do that, but they gave what they were able and even beyond their ability. In other words, they decided that they'd kind of bond together and figure out how to take care of each other's needs so that they could give more to the people that were in most need. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. They said, please let us do it. Even though the Macedonian churches were told, look, you guys are probably in the worst shape possible. We need to be giving you money. And they said, no. We want to be part of this because now we see what God can do when we plan and when we do it right and we follow his plan. We know how God can work it out. And so they exceeded. You got to see this. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves, and look at what it was. It started again with their heart. All right, look at this. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. They were willing then to say, all right, it's God's will for us to follow the leadership that was there, and Paul and all of them. They started following and listening to the idea of this plan of stewarding and saving and giving and what they needed to do to make sure that it was taking care of the needs around them. But the first thing they did was give themselves to the Lord. They decided that it was most important for this to be in balance. They had to make sure he was in first place, that he was at the center of everything, and that they acknowledged him as that. Then it goes on, so we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to the completion this act of grace on your part. Even the leaders around, and Titus was the one who was kind of the messenger of all of this, and he was the one who was telling them. I mean, it was an amazing thing to see this come to completion, that they were actually acting on this because of the grace of God in their life. And then it even goes on, but since you excel in everything, and this is amazing to say this about this church that just about a year ago had all kinds of problems and difficulties and issues. They said that they would excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you. They were just excelling now. All of a sudden, they put the Lord first, and look what happened. The way they believed, the way they talked, the way they began to study and understand who God was, the more that they just got focused, that's complete earnestness, and then they just had an overwhelming amount of love for other people. This is what happened. See that you also excel in this grace of giving. It says, now you can really see how the grace that God is working in your life, how he can take all of these things once you've made him first, and then you start to use this plan. And once you start to steward it properly, it's an amazing thing. It brings the grace of God to the forefront. Even in verse 9, he says this, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich," this is important, okay? And then you add this, "Yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich." See, when we start to think about being rich, we always go to this. And we forget that the richest we can be is because the God of the universe created us, loved us, and offers his grace to us. And that gift of grace makes us so rich. And sometimes we have the measure of this and we think, well, I'd be blessed if I had more of these. But no, you're blessed because you've been touched by the grace of God. See, that's the difference. I think we got to realize that Christ, he decided to give up everything he was, come down from heaven and take on dirt, a flesh, a body. He took on us. And when he did this, sinless as he was, he took our sin to die for it. That's an amazing thing. He gave up his riches so that we could become rich. See? Now, if what we say we believe about Jesus is true, then his plan for the money he provides us is the way we want to go. It's the way we want to go. See, if we believe that Jesus offered us grace like that, then it changes everything. It puts him first. It's everything that we need to know. And we watch these two churches, not these two churches, this one church and the transformation that happened in them from one letter to the other letter, these two letters. It's amazing to see what God did. And so let's ask this question. What if we treated money as a resource God has given us to live in the grace he has for us? What if we treated every dollar? So, you maybe don't have a dollar with you, but I want you to see one up close. Here's one to think about. If we were really to do this, we treated money as a resource from God. And the dollar was something that we considered as a resource that we can use to make the eternal go further, for God to do much more, to teach us, to actually get us there. So I thought to myself, how about if we traced a dollar? A couple of times maybe. Let me trace a dollar for you. 2 weeks from today, I'll be in Cienfuegos, Cuba. I'm going down there because I've traveled there many times, but I'm going down there to take the second half of the year monetary support for the church. We can't wire it to them. We can't transfer it in our banks. We can't do any of that for them because of the government that they have and because of the embargo that our country has on their country. And so all I can do is travel in as a tourist and be a friend and go in and take the funds to Maito and Janet so that they can use it. And in our giving, if we were to trace a dollar, it goes to take care of the needs they have to keep their church going. And 2 weeks from today, I'll have an opportunity to be in their church service, and I'll listen to them singing, and I'll see them do the things they're doing. And they're trying to make sure they have enough to take care of the families in the area. And every time they take money that they've collected and they have food ready, rice and beans, sometimes some meat, usually goat, and they'll take that and they'll have it available as people leave from the service. Or people will come from all over the neighborhood and area. Matter of fact, these next 2 months, they are doing services all about the gift of salvation. That's what they're calling it. And they want to do this evangelism where they actually have a conversation with everyone that's within walking distance. And for them, walking distance is 2 miles to church, and they want to have a conversation with all these people. And so their church is going to go out and they're going to do the best they can to talk to people and invite them and to tell them about the true message of Jesus. But 2 weeks from now, I'll take these, a lot of them, because I can't take a check, I can't take a credit card. I'll take these, and they'll take them and they'll do the best they can to work within the system there to get the Cuban money they need to be able to sell and to buy and to do whatever's necessary to keep the church going. That's $1. So if you've ever given $1 in a couple of weeks, I'll take some of those dollars with me down there to that. I want to show you something else. How many of you have one of these in your hand right now? Okay, let's trace $1. Probably about 50 cents to make the coffee, the sleeve so you don't burn your cute little fingers, the cup and the lid to put coffee together. So if you have given $1, you've made it possible for 2 people to have cups of coffee here at church. And you might say, well, that's just a waste. Okay? Yeah, you get up on Sunday morning and see if it's a waste when you need coffee to drink. Okay? But I will say this. Don't you want this to be an environment where people who come here feel warmly welcomed? No pun intended. That they have something that feels like, oh, they thought of me. They have coffee for me, or they have this for me. I mean, whatever. You get my point? And then in here, and I'll bring them over here to sprinkle them. You see those? You know what those are? They're Cheerios. That's right. Very good. They're Cheerios. They're gluten-free because some of our kids need gluten-free. Okay? So if you go over there now, you'll find tubs of those, containers of those, because little kids are sitting over there right now listening and hearing stories about an incredible Savior, Jesus. And as they're there, they need their tummies, taken care of so that they can actually sit and pay attention. And so maybe it's a gluten-free Cheerio. Okay? Let me give you another one. We're tracing $1, and these. This is just one of the kind of resources that are produced. This one's made for kindergarten through first grade. It's a book that basically takes them through everything they're studying this month. It's one that we produce here. We do it in-house, and so staff members that we pay produce these to make sure that we are giving them something that would teach them how to be in the Bible every day. It reminds them of their principle that they're learning about this month, which is integrity. And these are produced and given to parents so that parents can actually take their kids through, and it gives all kinds of information and things that will help them know what to do with this. Make sense? Is that great? But then I want to take you to probably the one that probably hits home the most. To go to camp this past summer, it cost about $550. But to make it possible for students, we lowered the cost to $300 per person. $250 came from our church budget per student to go to camp. We also had to rent 2 vehicles to make sure we got them all there safe and sound. We had to make sure that there were the right things taken care of so that everything, and we had to have insurance on those vehicles so that in case something would have happened, we would have had proper insurance to take care of anything that would have gone on. But if you were to trace $1, just imagine if you've given $1, if you've saved up and you had enough to give and you made it part of your budget, it led to one young man who went to camp. You paid $250 plus a little extra to make sure he got there safe and sound. And while he was there in the pool, he trusted Jesus and got baptized this morning. Let me just say this to you, okay? This was not to guilt trip you or anything like this, but if you have a plan with your money, it will inflation-proof your life. It will help you get through any circumstance. Matter of fact, the easiest way to say it is this way, is to give generously, to save enough, and to spend wisely. That's really the plan. That's stewarding your money. To give generously, to save enough, and to spend wisely. You have a plan to do it. Just remember the verses that we looked at the beginning. Matthew chapter 6, it says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal." No, but store up for yourselves. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there is your heart also. I want to offer something to you today. A lot of us in the room are like, wow. So those of you who have given $1, you're going to help make this happen for someone else in the room. If you've given $1 or many dollars, obviously, if we all gave $1, it would not hit what we need. Okay? But if we all saved and we had enough of these where we gave them generously and we knew, and we were saving so that we could do it and be prepared for the future, but also then spending wisely so that we had a plan of how to manage, then this is what can happen. We can actually offer some things to those that are out there. I want to put this up here. Many of you have heard of Financial Peace University. We're going to be doing that, and it's starting in just about a week or so. And then there's a thing called the Every Dollar app. It's a way to do budgeting, and there's a premium version of that actually costs money to use, but it's well worth it. Matter of fact, it's exactly the one that I use for my own personal finances. I make sure that I have this so my plan doesn't get messed up in the way I do math. Okay? And so this is what's important. If you'll get out your phones and you'll text GSS, you know what that stands for, right? Give, Save, Spend. If you'll text GSS to 937-879-1598, one person will be picked to receive a premium version of the Every Dollar app. And one person will also be picked, an additional person will be picked to go to Financial Peace University on us. That's if we do this. And so I want you to take that number down. Everybody got it? Everybody see it? You can text it right now. I expect a flood of these, please. All right? Everybody wants these. Let me just say, something else that we want to try to do, and we really believe this is something that is a next step for our church, but it's a next step for us because it's going to measure our hearts. Okay? This is really why we want to do this, because God knew that this was an important part. So we're going to do this together. Something we're going to do together is called the 90-Day Giving Challenge. We're going to start on October 1st, the beginning of October. We're going to go October, November, and December to the end of the year. We're going to ask everyone here to maybe start tithing, like we talked about last week, giving 10% of what you have. And giving that generously from a heart that's for God. And then maybe you're already doing that. That's great. Maybe you might consider upping your percentage. That's what my wife and I are going to do. We're going to up our percentage. And then, you know, maybe you might say, I'm not giving anything. If I were to give 10%, we would be broke. I wouldn't pay all my bills if I did that. Okay, so you need to get, you know, the principles that you can learn to be good stewards, but you can give something. Just begin the process. God wants your heart. And then I'm going to tell you the best thing about it would be then just to pray and set a budget to give, save, and spend. When it comes down to it, when it comes to this or any of that, this isn't what really matters. God doesn't need these from us. What he wants is our heart. So I want to encourage you today. Give Jesus your heart. Your heart is what matters most. Start there, just like the Corinthian church did. They put God first, and look what happened. They excelled in so many things in their life. They didn't feel the heaviness of the circumstances of the trial, like inflation. Inflation proofed their lives and did a work in their church. Give Jesus your heart. The same way Aaron gave Jesus his heart. Give him your heart.